increasing funding to these police departments often doesn't work. I mean, it never works, but the reason that it often doesn't work is because what is needed isn't necessarily the kind of services the police are trained to provide. So someone saw something, they said something, that reported the Buffalo shooter. He was brought in for a psychological evaluation. What were the resources for ongoing psychological care and follow-up is what I want to know. What were the resources in the school to continue to offer him that care and follow-up, or to make some kind of regular home visits, the kind of thing that could make him feel supported and potentially even scan for the availability of guns and access in the household. What kind of conversations were had with the parents about their responsibility to keep dangerous weapons from him? How were other community members alerted so they could keep themselves safe? I want to know all those kinds of things, but I also suspect that police officers aren't well equipped to carry out those kinds of roles, those kind of social support roles. And yet I'm sure a lot of people in the wake of this are going to be calling for more gunmen in the school or more resources to the police force, even though they have failed over and over again in these contexts.
Right, and that's frustrating too. We failed, so you should give us more money.
Right.
That doesn't actually inspire a lot of confidence. I mean, like, you got a lot of money. Why don't they check up on him 6 months later? Why don't they find out, is there a gun in the home?
Yeah.
Why don't they, what is he doing on social media? That's their responsibility, their law enforcement.
Yeah, and at the same time, when so many families, I mean, there's an ongoing, CPS crisis where people feel like there's a disproportionate amount of interference in the home in childcare situations. Obviously, that's very delicate because there are obviously
and there is a lot of
situations where there needs to be, but it does feel like on the whole, there's a disproportionate assessment of where resources need to go, and people tend to fall back into these same narratives of who's at fault here. Now, I do think that video games are an unfair scapegoat and have been since the 1990s. I mean, if given enough rope, people would claim that, anodyne games like Legend of Zelda were even a problem. And I know that would really bother you as an aficionado, Robby. But I do think there is an interesting conversation to be had about how the chat features in some of these games are facilitating different kinds of relationships and recruiting efforts, the same way that the telephone, letters, any kind of communication avenue can possibly be used for these kinds of ends. But I do think the point you made about Parler and these sites being pretty quick with their notification, Twitch being pretty quick with taking down a stream, given how many streams are ongoing at any given time, and how much there is to watch and observe, the fact that they were able to get that reported and taken down so quickly, I think is really it recommends the program. Frankly, it's a real compliment to the program, and it is frustrating to see politicians not come up with any new scripts when nothing has changed over the course of decades and decades and decades.
We had to hear this. We had to hear about how, free speech is one thing, but hate speech is another thing. Again, have they not taken the most basic class in constitutional law? That's not a thing. Well, it's not a thing.
But also the thing is if hate speech is protected, but that's a separate conversation from what people should have been doing in response to the hate speech. We knew about this guy's mentality. We knew about his kind of political agenda. We knew that he was a troubled kid. He was, and now adult. So it's not that the focus on the hate speech, I think, is a little off.
Right.
The fact is that we need to gag and muzzle the kid so he doesn't put the hate speech out to the public. It's how does the public respond? What kind of institutional supports do we have to respond when we identify this kind of thing is going on?
Right. And it's with the Nicholas Cruz situation, which is even clearer. People, the Parkland shooter, people said, this kid is a mass shooter in the making. They said those words to the authority. Everyone said, it's going to be this kid. They knew it was going to be this kid. And then it happened.
Yeah.
How much more seeing something, saying something do you want from the public? It's responsible behavior by the people, by so many other, and the authorities just didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And that's so frustrating. And then the people who, obviously, I'm not saying Kathy Hochul's new to the job. She's not necessarily responsible for the state police kind of bungling this investigation, but don't start turning it onto other things. If it's a matter of investing more in the state police, at least say that. I don't know that I agree with that as a policy, but propose that. Propose having law enforcement do something, because ultimately they're responsible for this.
Can you imagine a world where in the wake of a tragedy like this, a politician said, we have to take a good hard look at what policies enable this kind of thing to continue. Obviously, something isn't right. And we're going to introspect and come back to you with a full report from the government, from the police department, to see how we should go forward with this in the future. Like, can you just imagine? Like, I think that they believe that there would be negative political ramifications for just being honest and just taking the moment to say, this is a senseless act of violence. It could have been anticipated. It's obvious that there were warning signs, and we need to get serious as a community about how to address those in a more meaningful manner.
In the Parkland situation, they couldn't even get the sheriff to resign. The sheriff, who is a just jerk, the word I was going to say, a word I don't know that I can say on that, who trained the school resource officer who did not intervene, who hid while this was happening. The sheriff who trained him refused to resign. Ron DeSantis swore to fire him if he became governor, and then even though it was tremendously difficult to fire this public employee who absolutely should have resigned in disgrace, in horrific disgrace for his office's failing, one of many failings in the situation, would not resign. Ron DeSantis forced him out, which I approved of, but they never, so that's just a long way of saying they never take responsibility for these things.
Yeah.
Or for anything else.